Daily Soccer Podcast with the Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Newcastle Podcast. Proud to be part of the Global Sports Podcast Network. My name is Michael Grahamslaw, and today we are going to be going through what has been a turbulent 48 hours for one Tommy Tuchel, as England have come off a poor performance against Andorra and put in arguably one of their best in a long time to beat Serbia 5-0 in Belgrade. Now, a little bit of context. Serbia were unbeaten in 7 matches going into the game, a run that included draws against Denmark and Spain, alongside comfortable wins against Switzerland and Austria. So while the Serbs aren't exactly a big name in international football, it was definitely a banana skin for England, or at least a potential banana skin. But they knocked it out the park, and credit has to go to Thomas Tuchel, who, I'll be honest, if anyone listened to the preview pod Ian and I did, you'll know we were very concerned about him before yesterday, just because the performances against really poor teams were, well, really poor. But if we're going to up a game the better opposition we face, then I'm completely happy with that. Going into the game, we knew that the likes of Bukayo Saka, Jude Bellingham, John Stones, Cole Palmer, and many other players weren't fit or simply weren't selected. Thomas Tuchel has used, I think it's 32 players now since in his 5 games. So you're sitting there and thinking, right, he's clearly testing the waters to see what works for him, and I'm more than happy with that, particularly in these sort of games. But England were kind of ripe for the picking because we didn't know what to expect, and we were all expecting nothing great, let's be honest. But certainly didn't start like that. I mean, Serbia, rigid defence, as you probably expect. Classic 5 at the back. Serbia tried to hit us on the counter-attack, but never really caused England any problems during the game. For England, it was a set piece that opened the scoring. Harry Kane peeling off his defender. And it's an excellent header. It's what you expect from Harry Kane, realistically. You look him up in the dictionary, and that sort of peeling off the defender, header into the far corner, that's his bread and butter, really. And from that moment, the floodgates kind of opened. It probably has to be questioned on whether England were that good or whether Serbia were just that poor. But I am going to say it was more the former than the latter. And the reason for that is the distance covered by the two teams. England covered around 105 kilometres during the game, which in an end-to-end game where both teams are counter-attacking each other, it's pretty normal. In a game where it's basically attack versus defence, the defence tries to get out a counter-attack once every 10 minutes. It's actually quite impressive. England had control for over 2/3 of the game, dominated, looked impressive, and you think, didn't really have to work that hard. But in the end, they ended up running 8 kilometres more than Serbia during the game, which, when you're the defending team, usually you move around more than the attacking team, but it just shows Thomas Tuchel's work ethic, or his mentality, should I say, of work harder than the opposition. He's had it through his career. Didn't really work out too well at PSG. Worked out excellently to begin with at Chelsea. And there's a few other teams as well along the way. Dortmund, for example, where it's worked well to begin with, but maybe hasn't translated towards the end. Where maybe he's lost the players, something like that. I don't think that happens at international level, thankfully. But it looks like that work ethic and that mentality will be able to translate to international football. It does mean, though, if you're not playing for your club, if you're someone, let's say like Jack Grealish was last year, where you're not really getting game time, you're probably not going to be picked for England because you're not going to be able to match that work ethic. But then as for the Geordies, to Newcastle pod, we might as well talk about the Geordies. Dan Burn didn't get play against Serbia, but started the game against Andorra, incredibly solid. It was Tino Livramento and Anthony Gordon that started alongside former player Elliot Anderson. who had a really good game. Tino was solid, reliable, overall very good, but maybe not as influential as he is for Newcastle United, usually on that left-hand side. England focused their attacks down the right, which meant Livramento and Gordon had less of the action than they normally would for Newcastle. Normally for Newcastle, the centrepiece had to play a bit more of a side role rather than the starring role, but I think they were happy to do it, and they both were good when getting the ball to their feet and off the ball as well. Gordon cut in a number of times, got some semi-decent shots away. Livramento didn't put a foot wrong, and the overlap and understanding between the two is exactly what Thomas Tuchel would have liked to have seen. I do expect to see Burn, Livramento, Gordon, and Anderson while we're there in the next England squad, just simply because of performances this time round. There's a few players that maybe weren't as good, who maybe won't get the call, but it depends on whether he's basing it on how players do for England or how they do for their clubs, because there's a number of players who could still come into the side. I'm going to go into an early advert for the pod, and then I'm going to go into 5 things we learned from England versus Serbia, which will probably be a little bit longer and take up most of the episode. So we'll have a quick word from Bioniq, and then we'll get into the bulk of the pod.
Your body is unique, and Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bioniq, the world's most personalised supplements. Bioniq provide 100% tailor-made supplements, designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bioniq. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
Excellent stuff. So, Newcastle had an excellent win against Serbia. That was England, and 2 Newcastle players starred, 1 former. And I think they'll probably all be included in my 5 things. I have about 7, so I don't know which 2 I'm going to leave out. Might even end up including all and just go completely off the script. But 5 things we learned from England versus Serbia. The first is that Declan Rice will be completely essential to how England play, no matter what role he plays. So no matter what you think of Declan Rice, I know he's a man that splits opinions, particularly on this podcast. He is the man for England in central midfield. And traditionally, while he plays the role Elliot Anderson has had in the last 2 games, Rice played a bit more advanced against Serbia and had a huge impact on the game. When he's alongside Bellingham, Rice tends to have more of the ball, sits deeper, ends up having more of an impact on the build-up play for England. While alongside Anderson, Rice has had the freer role, typically ends up with the ball in space on the edge of the box. A lot of the times he was just getting it to feet, taking a touch and having a shot, which unfortunately they weren't great against Serbia. Newcastle fans, we know, well, from May, exactly how good Declan Rice can be for taking shots outside the box. But against Serbia, it just didn't really work out that well. But Rice is also on set-piece duty alongside Reece James. Well, when Reece James is fit, I imagine Trent will probably come in at the other right-back spot and end up doing exactly the same job Reece James did. But with Reece James's better stamina, better pace, a bit more physical, he suits that role a bit better than Trent, in my opinion. And it works out very well then for Declan Rice, because there's always that overlapping player who you can send it out to, a bit like Sandro Tonali does for Newcastle, where he'll pick up that ball, pick up the scraps, and it'll immediately go out to an overlapping fullback or a winger. Do think Tonali's a little bit better than Declan Rice, but that's not the question today. But yes, with Rice being on set piece duties and that pivotal role in the pivot, England, he has the ability to basically control a game from either of those positions. And while he wasn't, I would say, at his best against Serbia, he showed that he can do both roles and have an excellent impact on Thomas Tuchel's side, and it could be what England need going into the World Cup. Then number 2, it's about Noni Madueke, this one. He is tailor-made for international football, isn't he? I'm not sure what people think about him at club level. I personally was a little confused when he signed for Arsenal at international level, at club level, sorry. But I actually think the signing makes a bit of sense when you consider Bukayo Saka is usually injured for most of the season. But at international level, Noni Madueke looks a great fit. He looks right at home, and he's arguably been our best player since Tommy Tuchel took charge of the team. He's against Serbia, he rarely lost the ball, but still contained all that trickery that fans would like to see from the winger. I thought in comparison to Gordon was a bit too safe. He passed back quite a lot to a centre-back who would then try and get it down the right-hand side. Now, I don't know if that's the plan. You know, if you start your attack on the left-hand side, you play it back to the centre-back, you're kind of hoping that the defence doesn't shift over in time, and it gives you your right back and your right winger a lot more space on the ball to do that thing. That's probably the plan. So maybe it is a bit harsh on Gordon to say that, but we didn't really see that all too much the other way. Maduweke beat his man more often than not, rarely lost the ball, and was always a threat, which is fantastic to see, considering I think at club level for Chelsea in particular, he's been poor. It'll be interesting to see how he does for Arsenal. But England looked a completely different team when they have 2 proper wingers out wide. And Maduweke has unfortunately been the better of the 2 in comparison to Anthony Gordon and even Marcus Rashford, really. It was an excellent solo goal for England's second and a very strong performance on the right-hand side alongside Reece James. If Reece James can stay fit and Noni Madueke can build that chemistry with them, they would have worked together a fair bit when James was fit at Chelsea. They'll have a good understanding. A lot like Tino Livramento and Anthony Gordon. We might genuinely see 2 excellent fullback and winger partnerships on the wings for England, and that could be more than enough to cause some damage at the World Cup. Which I never thought I'd be saying a week ago. But then number 3, Elliot Anderson. There's no doubt now that Elliot Anderson can fill that midfield gap. If you think back to Euro 2020, I believe it was, when we first saw the pivot of Declan Rice and Calvin Phillips. I think it was Croatia, the opening game. When the team was announced, I think everyone was sitting there and going, that's far too defensive. Calvin Phillips and Declan Rice in centre midfield. What is going on? And it worked a treat. It was absolutely excellent. And I personally didn't see it coming because I didn't think the 2 would work together that well. But after Calvin Phillips moved to Man City, the thing of beauty was kind of starting to decay, and we hadn't really found an answer for it until Elliot Anderson. 2 man of the match performances, I believe he's been given. I wouldn't have gave him the man of the match yesterday against Serbia. I thought he had a bit of a cagey start, but was excellent in the end. But there were players who I thought were excellent for the full 90 minutes. But Elliot Anderson looks tailor-made to fill that gap made by Calvin Phillips. I kind of think he sometimes is trying a bit too hard to make things happen, which very admirable quality. But I think in the first 10 minutes, you were looking at Anderson and just going, you just need to slow things down a little bit to start with. Get yourself comfortable and then put in that great performance, because it was clear he was slightly off the boil to begin with. Sometimes from the first second of the game, you can tell he's on form. But just needed a bit of time to get comfortable, which he got after the first 10 minutes or so, and ended up putting in an excellent performance. You know, Jude Bellingham is likely to take the number 10 at England, which means there is a space next to Declan Rice in that centre midfield. And we said this months ago on the pod. It genuinely could be Elliot Anderson lining up alongside Declan Rice at the World Cup, which makes the decision to sell Anderson look worse than what it is. Hindsight is a beautiful thing. I said that last time we were on the pods talking about Anderson. But it is fantastic to see how he's done. If only we'd put a buyback clause in there, which I feel like should have been foreseen, but you're dealing with Marinakis. That's all I'll say there. I hope he does. I know he isn't a Newcastle player anymore, but I would be chuffed if he made that position his own, because he is an excellent central midfielder. He does a lot of the hard work, so other players don't need to. And I think against teams like Serbia, when you've got two players in there who are decent going forward, but can also defend, they could be good enough to be purely defensive midfielders, but they can also pass a ball and strike a ball. Teams like Serbia can't really handle that. And then number 4, I'm going to go with the jury is still out for Anthony Gordon for England. I think at Newcastle, Anthony Gordon is a very, very good player, and he's pivotal to how we play. Despite the red card against Liverpool, sometimes his attitude can be a little wanting, but he's a great player. For England, I think he's teetering on reserve to squad player level. I think the reason he's in there is simply because that left wing spot is quite weak for England. There hasn't really been a single performance I think it's his 13 caps. It might be 14 now, but off the top of my head, 13, that have made you sit up and think, this guy has to start for England. And unfortunately, his position is one where you kind of need that, because when Jude Bellingham's in the 10, let's be honest, England have 5 or 6 excellent number 10s. And he's going to be looking to see where he can potentially get some of those in, because you're going to have your first choice and your second choice. When your third choice in that position is as good as Eberechi Eze is or Morgan Rogers, you've got to try and fit them in somewhere, even if it's not as a starter. I mean, I haven't even thought about Phil Foden actually in there as well. Foden's proven he can't do it on the wing for England, so I can't imagine him getting too much space out there. But you're looking at Eberechi Eze and Morgan Rogers and thinking, those are two that you could realistically play on the left, and they would still put in great performances because they've done so for their club. And there's also Marcus Rashford in there, who at Man United was an outcast. Gone to Barcelona, he's not a guaranteed starter. I don't think he'll start that many games, but first player to play for England from Barcelona since Gary Lineker. He's a good player, and on his day, when his attitude is right, he is a fantastic asset to have. So when you haven't scored in over 200 days, like Anthony Gordon, there is a worry that he could find himself out of the next England squad and actually start playing himself out of the World Cup squad. But I think the way Thomas Tuchel plays does suit players like Anthony Gordon. And with Newcastle actually having a striker now, and Gordon isn't forced to play the striker role, which he never was really any good at. But credit to him, because he's the best we had in that position. I think when he's moved back out the left and you've got Johan Wisser or Nick Vultemade in there, he could get 10 goals and 10 assists again this season. Maybe a little bit of a stretch, because I don't think it'll take a few games to get back up and running. But if he can have another one of those seasons for Newcastle, he'll be in the squad guaranteed. But that 200 plus days is going to be on his mind, and it's certainly going to be on the mind of Thomas Tuchel. And then number 5, I'm going to go for the man that I've slated a lot for England, and I think I know I'm not the only one. And number 5 is there is still a huge role for Harry Kane with England. His performances over the last 3-4 years haven't been great. I've said that. You've said that. Everyone has said it. But his goal record is very, very impressive despite that. But against Serbia, we saw something that England have tried for a long time, but not really gotten right. So Harry Kane drops deep. As always, does it for Bayern Munich, did it for Tottenham. At Tottenham, he had Son Heung-min running beyond. Absolutely excellent. Son got 20 goals a season because of it. And then at Bayern, it's now Luis Diaz. But you had Leroy Sané, Serge Gnabry, many, Jamal Musiala, all running in behind when Kane dropped deep. At England, wasn't really anyone doing that well. Against Serbia, Noni Madueke, Anthony Gordon, and even Marcus Rashford when he came on, actually. It wasn't much for Harry Kane with Rashford because they weren't on the pitch for very long together. But you saw it at times where both would stretch the defence to make space, and then the number 10 would have so much space going forward that out of the three, you're often left with a 3v3, and Harry Kane then has the sort of time and space on the ball to pick out the man in the best position. A lot of the time, that was Noni Madueke. And you rarely see it against lesser opposition like Andorra because they don't attempt to get out of their own half. It's if we can keep England at under 3-0, it's a good result. Serbia tried it. England matched them defensively, and Harry Kane was excellent in the transition because you had the two proper wingers running in behind. When Rashford came on, I don't think it involved Kane this particular one, but when England won the ball back, Rashford anticipated it before England had even got the ball, and he started making that running behind the Serbian defence. Now, we never saw that for Man United, but it's clear at Barcelona he's got something to prove. At England, he's got something to prove. So that style of play will suit Kane so well, and it'll get our wingers more goals. It does, however, mean you need pacey and clinical wingers. Clinical is probably one of the last words I would use to describe Anthony Gordon and Noni Madueke. So we might see Ollie Watkins tested on the left-hand side, and obviously Saka will come in on the right-hand side when he's fit. But the main thing for me there is Marcus Rashford is going to play on the left. Ollie Watkins could then be tested on the left-hand side as well, because you might remember Thomas Frank utilised him there at Brentford, and to great effect, really. They got promoted. He was playing striker the year they got promoted, but they went from being a bottom half championship side to playoffs with Ollie Watkins on that left-hand side, and he was excellent after signing from Exeter. So I think it's one of those where England could very well do that with Saka and either Rashford, Gordon, or Watkins on that left-hand side. Again, Gordon is going to have to be a lot more clinical if he wants to fit in there. But you could really see England causing a lot of damage, and with more clinical wingers, actually England maybe have a chance at this World Cup. I think we've kind of been looking at it for the last, since Thomas Tuchel's first game, and thinking, yeah, this isn't going to go well, is it? It's going to be quite a difficult one for England. We're probably going to go out in like the round of 16 or the quarters to not Iceland again, but someone along those lines. But actually, I'm starting to think maybe with Thomas Tuchel, the higher the quality of opposition, the better we'll see England play, because a lot of our players based on transitions and counter-attacks, which you just don't get against the likes of Andorra, Latvia, Albania. So maybe, just maybe, things are starting to look up for England. But there you have it. 5 things we learned after England's 5-0 demolition of Serbia in Belgrade, where we went into the international break thinking it's going to be another boring England. And we finished on a 5-star display. Who saw that coming? Only Tommy Tuchel. Can it continue? Unfortunately, it's going to be another month before we find out.